Everyone. Welcome to a friendly introduction to FHIR Shorthand. Myself, Raman Dhanoa, I would be moderating the session. And I am a trainer slash consultant working with FHIR. Mark, are you ready to?
I'm ready if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Awesome.
Oh,
okay.
Excellent. So
over to you, Mark.
Video.
Thank you.
All set to go? All right, well, welcome to our session on learning to fish, a friendly introduction to FHIR Shorthand. I'm Mark Kramer, and I wish I was in Amsterdam, but unfortunately I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts, other side of the pond, and I'll just have to vicariously pretend I'm in Amsterdam. I do miss that lovely city. So, yeah, a little bit of introduction about myself. I'm chief engineer at MITRE, one of many chief engineers, so it's not that big a deal. I've been creating implementation guides for a long time. Maybe among the first people to create an implementation guide was the QI Core Quality IG 2015. At that point in time, we were using Excel spreadsheets. And it was a little painful. So that really was kind of the genesis of FHIR Shorthand. My colleague Chris Moselle and I thought there had to be a better way. And we created a tool for our own use, which then we found out that other people liked as well. A little bit about MITRE, the company I work for. No, it's not a shoe company or a drugstore in Australia. Well, it's both of those things, but in the US, it's a nonprofit company that works in the public interest. We work mainly for the federal government, and we are not a vendor. We don't sell things. We are neutral so that we can advise the government on fresh ideas and ways to innovate and serve the public better. So that's where I'm coming from. We've had a healthcare practice for many years now, 15 years, and it's been growing as healthcare is a huge issue, a very expensive issue, as you know, in the United States. So what I'm going to do is discuss the purpose of FHIR Shorthand, or FISH, FSH. Give you a little bit of a taste of fish, and then briefly go through the creation of an IG using fish. And if you'd like to learn more, and if you're around on Friday, there's a session on advanced fish, what to do when you're hooked, Friday at 2:30 Amsterdam local time with my colleague Chris Moselle, who deserves most of the credit for FHIR Shorthand. All right, so just where are we coming from? We're coming from profiling FHIR, creating implementation guides. So you know that FHIR is a great standard. It provides FHIR resources, a way to transfer them between sites via an API. It has definitions of data elements, extensibility, and a whole lot more. But it doesn't have everything. And when you apply FHIR to a particular problem, you're going to have to do a little bit more. That's the role of implementation guides, to provide additional data structures, definitions, terminologies, value sets, defining the actors and the workflows, exchange of data between those actors, particular API operations, and all the conformance requirements and more goes into an implementation guide. So you'll hear a lot about that if you haven't already. And it's that blue side of the diagram where FHIR Shorthand is used to create implementation guides. So that's our specialty. So what is FHIR Shorthand actually? Well, it's a language kind of like a programming language for defining FHIR artifacts. And it's just text. It has statements that have syntax, just like a computing language. So if you kind of go towards the more technical side, you might find this very easy to use. The language is highly specialized towards doing the tasks of defining FHIR artifacts. And you can use FISH to define profiles, extensions, instances, value sets, code systems, logical models, which you may not even have heard of, conformance resources, and much more. You can do this using any text editor, although we do have some special plugins for VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which makes life a lot easier. And like many languages, or all computer languages, there's a compile phase, an interpreter phase, and that's Sushi. Sushi is, I'll talk about that. That's the way you take the FISH language files and convert to FHIR artifacts. And one of the benefits of that is that you create JSON that has FHIR best practices. So there's lots of different ways you can use FHIR and create profiles. Some of them are better than others, more accepted, and they will be more future-proof. And a lot of that is built into Sushi. Since you're dealing with text files, you can use GitHub like any other kind of programming project for version control and collaboration. FISH is free and it's open source. Feel free to contribute. It's an HL7 normative and it's a mixed normative STU standard, so it's stable. The normative parts aren't going to change. And it's built into the FHIR IG publisher and other tools like Simplifier, which are used to create IGs and profiles as well. So here's an example of FISH. Now, I don't even want you to look at it. The colors are nice. That comes from our Visual Studio Code plugin. So kind of gives you an orientation to strings versus other things. But the idea is that you can take like a very small set lines of FISH, don't try and read it yet, and out pops a part of a implementation guide. And we're going to go into the blue arrow and what goes into that, because it's not just push a single button, but it's pretty close. It gets pretty smooth and easy to go from one to the other. And I'll be discussing, of course, some of the language of FHIR Shorthand. Now, it turns out that FHIR Shorthand is becoming and has become very, very popular as a method for creating IGs. We track this and we find that the consumption of FISH is rising. I love that picture. FHIR Shorthand has been around for 3 short years, and the number of projects that are currently using FHIR Shorthand has grown from 40 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago up to 400 projects. And you can actually, look at those projects and go to their GitHub and see them. We have over 500 Zulip chat subscribers on our Zulip channel in the FHIR chat, and there's been over 180,000 downloads of Sushi. So it's a pretty cool community that has a lot of life, and there's a lot of people using it. So it is like one of the more stable and foolproof tools in the entire FHIR universe. It's been tested and tested and tested. And it's up to date with FHIR 5, so that's a good thing too. Okay, so enough about that. Let's learn to fish, okay? And I'm gonna take you to, or at least point out a site, fishschool.org, no I in fish. We wanted to call that School of Fish. That's the obvious fun, but it kind of spelled out School Offish, which didn't sound that great to our ears, so we decided fishschool.org. And that's where you're going to find a lot of information about fish. One of the things, if you visit there, you can click on this button on the home page, Play with Fish, and it'll take you to a playground, Fish Online, which allows you to experimentally interact with sushi. So there's two ways to do that. One is that you can type or paste your fish here and then convert to JSON and see the FHIR artifacts over on the right side. Or you can take some JSON, if you're wondering what that would look like in the fish language, paste in your JSON and go the other way using a tool that's built in here called GoFish. So GoFish is like the inverse of sushi. And push that button and then you can see the generated fish. So that's another way if you like have a profile and you want to see what the heck that would look like if that were rendered in fish, you can use this Fish Online tool. I've included a couple of links here to follow along with these exercises. And if you try to shorten it up, type in bit.ly/DD for DevDays -fish1. What will happen is that you'll go to this previous screen. You'll see this. It'll take a little while to load. Give it a minute because we're actually downloading Sushi and a number of libraries locally, which run in your browser. So be patient. If you want to do that now, you'll be able to follow along. So first example, a very simple one to create a profile on patient. And you'll notice a couple of things here. First of all, comments are in green. They start with a double slash. It has three parts, which I've broken out. A declaration, which says I'm making a profile, a set of keywords, and then a set of rules. The rules are different because they begin with asterisks. So you can always tell the rules apart from the declaration and the keywords. And the declaration is just the first line, and then there's a number of keywords. I'll walk through this entire thing as we go. So let's start doing that. So the first line of this, and this creates an entire profile, by the way, a pretty legit profile with a few modifications. The first line is what we call a declaration. It says, I'm going to create a profile, and its name is going to be my patient profile. And it's whenever you create a fish definition of any kind of item, you're going to have some sort of declaration that looks like this. And it just asserts what you want to create, and you give it a name or an ID. So the common declarations are profile, as you see here, extension, instance, value set, and alias, which you'll see in a moment are used for shortening long URLs. Less commonly, you'll see things for code systems and rule sets. Rule sets are a cool feature that I don't have time to go into, but it makes shorthand even shorter by giving you reusable pieces of shorthand that you can use all over the place for repetitive tasks. And that's like shorthand is short. Rule sets make shorthand very short. Other kinds of things you can create are invariants, mappings, and logical models, which I won't go into, but my colleague Chris Moselle will go into some of these on Friday at 2:30. The next part of this profile are keywords, and there are two of them here. One declares the parent of the profile, and if you know about profiling, every profile either comes from a resource or another profile. So its parent is just where it comes from, where it derives from, and then it has a description. In this case, the description is just an example patient. So the keywords describe the thing that you're going to be creating, and commonly the keywords are ID, description, title, parent, which you see here, and instance of, which is kind of like parent, but for instances. You say it's an instance of a resource or a profile. Less commonly, you'll see context, expression, severity, source, usage, and XPath. These have special purpose uses, and I'm not going to talk about them further. Now, the meat of the fish, if fish can have meat, are the rules. And the rules, I'm going to go through them one by one. They're the 4 statements over here at the right. And the first one, they all start with asterisk. The first one is a kind of rule we call a cardinality rule, which is used to set the minimum and maximum occurrence of an element. So in this case, we're saying name, that is patient.name, because we're profiling the patient attribute, or the patient resource, sorry. Patient.name has min occurrence of 1 and max occurrence of 2. And a couple of variations of that, if you just want to set a lower bound, it would be 1 ... or just the upper bound, it would be ... 2. In this case, there's no harm in sort of reiterating what is already there. So we have a required name and no more than 2 names. So that's a cardinality rule. The second rule is what we call a flag rule. Again, it starts with an asterisk, and it applies a must support flag in this case to 2 elements, name.given, which is really patient.name.given, and name.family. And the must support flag is the most common, but there's others. There's an SU for summary, the question mark exclamation point for modifier, things you got to watch out for, trial use, normative, or draft status. You can play around with these flags a bit. You can have multiple flags on one line. You can have multiple items on one line, which you actually see up here. Or you can combine cardinality rules and flag rules together and say, like, subject is a required element of max cardinality 1, and it is must support. So that's a flag rule. This is a binding rule. It's a little longer, so I don't have that window on the right side, but it says our marital status attribute has to be from, the value has to be from a certain value set. And here we're giving the canonical URL for that value set that exists somewhere else in FHIR. And we call this a binding rule because we're binding this variable to this value set. That's a very common thing to do with a profile. And, you know, very often any coded element, you'll associate it with a value set. And also you would very often associate a strength with that binding. There are 4 strengths in FHIR. This isn't a shorthand thing. The strengths are example, preferred, extensible, and required. Here's an example where you give the strength explicitly. The gender, it has to come from this canonical for a value set, but that's preferred, which means you should take it if you can from this value set. Here's another one, a code from this value set, and it's extensible. And I'm not going to explain extensibility. That's a topic for another day. The default is required, by the way. So this rule is valid, even though it doesn't give a binding strength, but it defaults to required. So this would force marital status to come from that value set. The last rule in this example is a type rule, which constrains the data types of elements within a resource. So in this case, deceased is an element which is a choice element indicated by this bracket X. And actually, if you look at the patient resource, deceased could be a Boolean or a date time, or a date, I think. So the Boolean would say true or false, the patient is dead. The date would be the date of death. So this is a rule that we use to constrain it to only a Boolean. I don't know why you do that, but all we want to know is whether the patient is alive or dead. So there are lots of ways to use this. You can take a data types such as value quantity, which is part of FHIR, and constrain it to a narrower data type like simple quantity, which is a subtype of value quantity. These are examples of constraining a choice variable again. This third one is constraining it to a choice, down from 3 or 4 choices down to 2 choices with the OR. And you can also constrain references, and the way we express references is through the reserved word reference and then a parentheses practitioner. So the performer could be many other things than a practitioner. We just want it to be a practitioner in this case. And in this case, you could take a profile of practitioner and you can constrain the performer to be, for example, a PCP or an emergency room physician. It has to conform to one of these 2 profiles. So we've seen 4 types of rules, and we could just take this and compile it over and create a minimal IG, and I'll get through that in a minute. So very quickly, here's an instance. You often want to create examples of your profiles or just instances of resources. Here, the keyword or the declaration is instance. The keywords are instance of. In this case, it's a patient, but we could have made it my patient based on the previous profile. It has a description and some rules. One thing you'll notice if you look, all these rules have an equal sign. These are all assignment rules. So there's just one type of rule that's associated with instances. We're setting, for this instance, the active element is true. The given name is Jane. The family name is Doe. The birth date is 1965, January 1st. Marital status is legally separated, and the practitioner is a reference to a practitioner, doctors certainly. Now, there are other ways to write this that are a little cleaner, perhaps. You can indent to replace the dotted strings. So in this previous, we said name.given and name.family. If you don't want to repeat the name part of it, you can just indent by 2 spaces. And the other thing I really don't like is this very long URL. And you can, and especially if this repeats, you can define what we call an alias. Here we use $marital to represent this entire string, which shortens the previous statement down to marital, which is the code system, and then the code and the display text. And let me explain that. It turns out that the way we do codings, here I'm on the 3rd bullet, is also shorthand. There's actually 3 parts to coding, possibly more even, but 3 parts to coding, which is the code system, the code, and the display text. And this pound sign is the way we delimit symbols. So if you see a pound sign in shorthand, that always means you're seeing a code. So in this case, the code is L, standing for legally separated in this particular code, V3 code system. All right, so in the interest of time, I'll skip over a few other things, but there are ways in shorthand to deal with array elements. This is not the only way, but it's one way to indicate the array position explicitly. This is how you define a value set. It has a declaration value set, a number of keywords, and then you can just list the codes that you want in this value set. That's one way to do it. And I've thrown in one more rule, which sets the copyright, which brings up a whole dimension of capability in FHIR Shorthand. The caret, this up arrow thing, allows you to set things directly in the structure definition. Copyright is not part of a value set, but it's part of the definition of a value set. So that's how you get directly at the value set instance, and you can do that for structure definitions too. So that's something you want to take note of. So I'm going to walk through now in the last minute how to create an implementation guide. You'll have the IG publisher installed. You'll go through a simple process of installing Sushi. And you'll start off by getting to a directory where you want to create a directory tree, and you'll run sushi -- init, and it'll create a structure for you, like a bare bones structure. And then you'll put your fish files in this input. You'll see there's one file there already, patient.fish. You just get into your favorite editor and you start creating fish files. You populate your fish directory, and then you run sushi dot, and it will compile and test your fish. And it will reward you if it compiles with a little pun. And it'll populate a new directory called fish generated. And fish generated contains all the things you need to run the FHIR IG publisher, all the artifacts in JSON and a few other things like menu definitions and such. And then you run the IG publisher. This is the standard HL7 IG publisher, and that'll create your IG. So in 2 quick steps, you have an IG from your fish files. The amount of compression is really tremendous. People love using it because they just say what they want and out pops the IG. Now I'm going to point you to some resources. So the language itself is a normative standard. I mentioned that. That's up. It's an IG actually, which you can find. It's on the FHIR IG sites. Its URL is here, and you can read all the ins and outs of the shorthand language. There's also a quick reference card. Right now it's a little out of date, but it covers most of the basic things accurately. And some of the tools. I mentioned the language spec, Sushi and Go Fish already. There's Fish School, where you can find all the documentation, Fish Online, which I briefly mentioned, and the VS Code extension, which I also mentioned. So why should you use Fish to create your IGs? It is short. It's concise, readable, and understandable. It comes with a great set of free tools. You can very rapidly make changes. It's just a highly productive environment. It's got a very large active community. You can collaborate and do version control in GitHub. It's validated, it's stable, it's normative. It provides a lot of error checking and does a lot of things for you. It's built into the IG publisher. It's built into Simplifier and other tools you might like to use. And you can take any existing IG to get started and fishify it using GoFish. So I've gone through some of the advantages of why you should use FHIR Shorthand. I've gone through basic fish, and I remind you to come into the Advanced Fish course 2:30 p.m. Friday, and I'll stop and take questions if there are any.
I think there are 2 more minutes. Yeah, okay.
That's Linnell James. Thanks for the overview on fish. Have you looked at any of the opportunities to use ChatGPT to further make it easier to generate IGs using fish?
You bet. Linnell, good to talk to you. Good to see you, air quotes. Yeah, the thing is that I checked a few months ago, actually. It's worth checking again. So fish is a kind of specialty language. I don't know that it knows enough to generate the fish that you, so it really didn't know a lot about fish when I tried this a couple of months ago. It's great at JSON, it's great at some of the core languages. I hope, certainly you've reminded me to go back and recheck that to see whether it's really mastered the fish language. But yeah, I'm having a heck of a lot of fun with ChatGPT and doing a lot of real work with ChatGPT at this point. And it would be worth going back to see if we can create from a text description some valid FHIR shorthand. So thank you for that reminder.
Just a quick note there. I tried ChatGPT 4 version to do, and I sort of quickly trained it and then did the conversion for me. So it's getting there.
Excellent. Excellent. I got to work that into a future talk. We won't even, we'll just describe what you want. I think that's the future.
Any other question? Just
Hi,
take
this
one.
is Linda. This is Linda Michelson. I saw how you can create the instances. I'm guessing there's a way to get it to iterate through certain things, like, you know, give me one with each of the elements in this value set.
Oh, that's a good question, and a feature that we don't have. So if you wanted to, so actually, let me modify that. There is a project that we have to generate test examples from IGs. And part of that is to do exactly what you say, is populate instances from value sets you find in an IG. So that's not really part of a core FHIR shorthand function. There, Linda, I would point you to a GitHub site. This hasn't been widely used yet, but it is possible. It just isn't a core feature of FHIR shorthand. I'd love to talk to you more about the requirements side of that, though.
I was thinking mainly about if you have an IG to generate all possibilities. Yeah, but
yeah. So I think, yeah, that might be combinatorial, of course, but the project we were working on was specifically to get testing examples. So try to look at the constraints that were testable and, you know, generate those that you could use with testing tools. But yeah, it's certainly a start, and we have some experts in-house that could help you, or at least point you to that stuff. Great suggestion.
thanks.
Awesome.
Okay, so it looks like we're over.
Yeah,
Thanks very much. I'm not on site, unfortunately, so but you can hoover me, if that's a verb, and hopefully I'll see that.
Okay, awesome. I think with that, we'll conclude our session. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you for attending the session.
You're welcome, my pleasure.